Beijing's National People's Congress is set to take the next step towards drafting a controversial new security law that's increasing tensions with Hong Kong. Critics say the law will remove pro-democracy advocates' right to free speech and to rally against control by China. Protests have been escalating ahead of the changes. Demonstrators say the law would violate the freedoms promised under Hong Kong's special one country, two systems status. On Wednesday, protesters also gathered in opposition to a bill criminalizing disrespect for China's national anthem.
Thousands of Hong Kong residents defied police orders and took to the streets, demonstrating for their independence and against China's efforts to tighten its grip on the semi-autonomous region. The protesters were met by a strong police force, which fired pellets filled with pepper to disperse the crowds and arrested hundreds. One of the residents' concerns, a bill threatening anyone who disrespects the Chinese national anthem with up to 3 years in prison. I'm worried about the national anthem law. I know it will pass in the Legislative Council because pro-establishment lawmakers have a majority there. I came to Hong Kong from mainland China when I was young, so I know about the darkness of China. I'm worried China will impose its standards and its system on Hong Kong. Protesters want to express their outrage not only against the national anthem law, but also against the new national security law imposed by the Chinese government. The full text of the legislation has yet to be published, but it has raised international alarm over freedoms in the city. Hong Kong's security chief defended the measures on Chinese state television. It is necessary and important to establish a legal framework and enforcement mechanism for safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region at state level. This will be conducive to the long-term stability and prosperity of Hong Kong and also helpful in safeguarding the legitimate rights and freedoms of Hong Kong residents. But that's exactly what the protesters fear Hong Kong will lose: the freedoms and civil liberties secured when the former British colony was handed back to China in 1997. They are meant to remain in place for at least another 2 decades. Beijing brands the matter an internal Chinese affair, but the leader of Hong Kong's pro-democracy Civic Party is calling on the international community for help.
Hong Kong has long been a member of the free world. We share the same values. We share the same liberty and freedom. And now when China is trying to take this away from Hong Kong, we expect the rest of the world will speak up for us.
Despite social distancing rules, resistance against Beijing's attempt to tighten its grip on Hong Kong is growing fiercer. Protests are likely to continue in the coming days.
Well, for the very latest from Hong Kong, let's cross over to Tom Grundy. He's editor-in-chief of the Hong Kong Free Press website. Tom, thanks for being with us. Tell us, what's the situation in Hong Kong today?
Well, just a few hours ago, we saw more shenanigans in the local parliament as somebody, a pro-democracy lawmaker, threw a rotting plant on the floor. And just in the last hour or so, we've seen a few more protests crop up in the central business district, people chanting pro-democracy slogans. That's despite about 360 arrests yesterday, some of them school children in uniform, pepper spray, pepper balls, as you mentioned, a huge police security operation surrounding the legislature as it debated that controversial national anthem law. And then we saw cat and mouse chases throughout the shopping districts well into the night, with protesters trying to invade some of the roads, set fire to makeshift barricades. But it seems police very much have the upper hand at the moment. They're very prepared, and there's been a huge police presence on the streets in the last couple of days.
Now, today, authorities in mainland China are expected to pass a national security law for Hong Kong that many say is tantamount to imposing direct rule. If that happens, how can we expect Hong Kongers to react?
I think we can safely say with more protests. This law is set to ban sedition, secession and subversion, but it will not get any local legislative oversight, unlike the national anthem bill. It will be directly inserted into Hong Kong's mini-constitution in the coming weeks and days. At first, it may target pro-independence activists and frontline protesters, but there are fears that it could expand to NGOs, to media, to mainstream Democrats, and perhaps even to pro-establishment figures who don't fall in line. So with the local officials now calling a lot of the protesters terrorists, we're going to see tonight perhaps some of the wording, perhaps some messages from Li Keqiang, the #2 Chinese official, as to what this draft legislation might look like.
Well, amid the protests, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo notified Congress that the Trump administration no longer considers Hong Kong to be autonomous from mainland China. The announcement could end the Asian financial hub's special trade status with the U.S. China has said the move was interfering in what it calls a domestic matter. Here's what Pompeo had to say.
Hong Kong does not continue to warrant treatment under United States laws in the same manner as U.S. laws were applied to Hong Kong before July 1997. No reasonable person can assert today that Hong Kong maintains a high degree of autonomy from China, given facts on the ground.
Tom, what would it mean for Hong Kong if the U.S. revokes the territory's special trading status?
Well, at the moment, Hong Kong is considered separate when it comes to trade policies regarding the US, but we don't know the details yet. The top official in Asia from the US has said that this is a 1-2 action. They will make the declaration as they have done, and then they will see how to act. It could involve sanctions against officials, which some of the pro-democracy crowd here are lobbying for, new visa rules, investment restrictions. Joshua Wong, famous local activist here, told us earlier that I think this is now the time we will continue our international advocacy and seek bipartisan support. That action itself, a lot of the local authorities consider to be foreign interference. So they may be cracking down on groups like Demosisto in these coming months.
Tom, thank you very much for filling us in there. That was Tom Grundy from the Hong Kong Free Press website. Well, Hong Kong's status as Asia's financial hub could be at risk after China announced it would bypass the region's legislature to impose its own security measures, triggering protests across the city. So far, business in Hong Kong has been booming, punching way above its weight, ranking among top global financial centers. It has one of the biggest stock exchanges on the continent, while plenty of investment banks call Hong Kong home. But that status is at risk. Hong Kong was already hit by protests last year, falling 3 places to 6th most important financial hub in an index published by think tank Ziyan. That was back in March, and the new security laws could see it fall further. Well, here in the studio to talk about all this, we have Clifford Coonan from DW Business. Good to see you, Clifford. So tell us, this new security law that's about to be passed, it's making a lot of people nervous. What kind of impact do you think it will have on Hong Kong as an investment location?
Well, I think investors like security and they like safety and they like predictability. And I think a lot of those factors have been removed by this development now. People always looked at Hong Kong as a haven for safety in what is quite a turbulent region, and as a way into China, which is obviously a booming market that has driven so much economic growth in recent years. A lot of that security and predictability has been taken away now. So it's going to have a big impact on business in Hong Kong.
What alternatives do investors have in the region, Clifford? Is Shanghai then emerging as a good competitor?
Well, I think people have thought about Shanghai and increasingly about Shenzhen as well, just over the border from Hong Kong because of its associations with the tech industry. But there's still a general perception that they're not there yet. They still don't have the infrastructure, and they also don't have the transparency and the rule of law that Hong Kong has always offered. So in a way, it's another more evidence in a way of the threat that's facing Hong Kong now, because those things like transparency and rule of law are being undermined by this new legislation. If you consider there's already legislation controlling things in Article 23 of the Basic Law, controlling things like demonstrations and stuff. So investors are looking at this and they see it as a real power play, as a political move, much more than an economic move, which makes their position more difficult.
Where is Europe in all of this? We're hearing a lot from the US on this, but not too much from Europe. How could all this affect relations between Europe and China?
I think it's one of the big questions right now. We haven't had that much of a reaction from Europe yet. People are still waiting for Chancellor Angela Merkel here in Berlin to make a statement about it. German companies, for example, like Volkswagen, have huge interests in China, and they want to keep Beijing on side. So politically, it's a very difficult position for them. But at the same time, we've seen that Berlin has taken a political position on China before and on Hong Kong. And, we've had activists here who've been given political asylum, which was an incredibly bold step a number of years ago. So I think there is political will there. And within the government itself here in Berlin, there are calls for the government to say more. We have to wait and see what the European reaction is going to be. At the moment, it's very US-China focused. We have a de facto Cold War in many ways. So it's a question now of where Europe puts itself in that context, how it protects its business interests while at the same time living up to its sort of ethical responsibilities in the area.
Clifford, thank you very much. Clifford Coonan from DW Business.